Emily Carter never imagined that one ordinary Wednesday afternoon would begin to change the quiet direction of her life. She lived just outside of Seattle, in a neighborhood filled with pine trees, wet sidewalks, and the steady rhythm of commuter traffic that seemed to mirror the routine of her days. For years she had moved through life with a kind of practiced calm, waking early, making coffee, driving to her office job, and returning home to a marriage that felt more like a quiet partnership than a living bond. Her husband, Mark, was steady, practical, responsible, the kind of man who kept the lawn trimmed and the house warm. But over time their conversations had grown thin. They spoke about bills, schedules, groceries, and the leaking faucet that had been bothering them for weeks. What they didn't speak about was how they felt, or how the distance between them had widened so slowly that neither of them fully noticed until the silence became part of the walls around them. Emily never blamed him, and she didn't blame herself either. She simply assumed this was what long marriages became, two people walking together, but not quite looking at each other anymore. Then came Daniel Hayes. Every Wednesday, like clockwork, Daniel delivered packages to her office. He wore the FedEx uniform with an easy confidence, and he moved with the kind of energy that made everything around him seem more alive. His hazel eyes carried warmth even on cold mornings, and his smile looked genuine every time. He always asked about her week, about whether she had eaten lunch, about the weather that Seattle couldn't make up its mind about. His tone was light, friendly, never crossing any lines, but each small conversation left an invisible imprint on her heart. At first she didn't think much of it, a little brightness in her week, nothing more. But over time she noticed that she looked up from her desk the moment she heard the delivery door open. She noticed she fixed her hair quickly when she knew Wednesday was coming. She noticed she felt disappointed when another driver showed up in his place. Still, she told herself it was nothing, harmless, just friendly curiosity, just a moment of warmth in the middle of long work hours, until the day the rainstorm changed everything. Seattle rain was nothing new. But that afternoon the sky opened in a way that felt almost dramatic. Sheets of water poured down, sweeping across the parking lot, blurring the windows until the outside world looked washed away. Thunder rolled close by, making the building vibrate lightly. Most people stayed inside, quietly complaining about the storm. Emily sat at her desk, trying to finish a report, when the door swung open and Daniel stepped in, soaked from the rain. He laughed as he closed the door behind him, running a hand through his wet hair. "Guess I picked the wrong minute to unload the truck," he joked, water dripping from his sleeves. Emily felt a warmth in her chest she hadn't felt in years. She grabbed a towel from the office kitchen, offering it to him with a smile that surprised even herself. "You're going to freeze out there," she said quickly, trying not to sound too concerned. When he reached for the towel, their fingers brushed, and the spark that shot through her hand shocked her. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was so real, so unexpected, and she wasn't prepared for the wave of emotion that followed. Daniel didn't seem to notice the moment the way she did, but he did pause, his eyes lingering on hers just a second longer than usual. Then he laughed softly and wiped his face with the towel. "Thanks, Emily," he said in a tone that felt gentle. "I owe you one." Thunder cracked outside, making her jump slightly. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Do you drive home in this?" he asked, looking toward the window where the rain slammed down like a waterfall. "I usually do," she replied, trying to sound calm, though the storm looked bad enough to drown her small car. "How about I drive you?" he suggested casually. "It's on my way today." She hesitated, her heart suddenly beating with a strange mix of fear and excitement. She knew it wasn't really a big deal, people drove each other home all the time. But she also knew that something about saying yes felt like stepping into a moment she wouldn't be able to easily undo. Yet the storm was getting worse, and the idea of walking through the downpour alone felt overwhelming, so she nodded, telling herself it was just practical. "Okay," she said. "Thank you." The moment she climbed into the delivery van, she felt something shift inside her. The storm outside roared, but inside the van the air felt warm, close, almost intimate. She buckled her seatbelt, trying to calm the flutter growing in her chest. Daniel started the engine, the wipers swinging frantically as he pulled out of the parking lot. They began talking quickly, the conversation flowing faster than the rain on the windshield. He asked about her favorite childhood books, she asked about his dream of starting a delivery business. They talked about music, road trips, long drives through quiet towns, places they wanted to see someday. She didn't realize she was smiling so much until her cheeks hurt. She didn't realize she was laughing so freely until she heard the sound of it echoing in the small space. She didn't realize how hungry she had been for this kind of attention until she felt full for the first time in years. Lightning flashed, bright and close. Emily startled again. Daniel reached over instinctively, his hand touching hers for only a moment, steady and warm. "You okay?" he asked, his voice soft. She nodded, but her heart was trembling. Something inside her cracked open, something she thought had been lost long ago. She wasn't thinking about crossing lines or marriage or consequences. She was thinking only about the warmth in his voice, the comfort in his presence, and the surprising safety she felt right then. He didn't pull his hand away right away, and she didn't move hers, but the moment wasn't physical, it was emotional. It was the feeling of being seen, truly seen, after years of being invisible in her own home. For a moment they simply breathed in the same quiet rhythm, rain pounding outside, the world narrowing to the two of them. Then a car honked loudly behind them, and Daniel quickly pulled his hand back, clearing his throat as he accelerated through the green light. The moment broke, but the feeling didn't. Emily stared at the rain. Blurred glass, trying to settle her racing thoughts. She knew she had stepped into something complicated, something she wasn't ready to name. She knew she shouldn't feel the way she felt, but she also knew she couldn't deny it anymore. By the time they reached her neighborhood, the rain had softened into a steady drizzle, but her heart felt louder than ever. She wasn't prepared for how deeply the short drive had affected her. Daniel slowed in front of her house, and as he put the van in park, the brief silence between them grew heavy, not uncomfortable but full. "You really okay?" he asked again, softer this time. She nodded, but her voice trembled when she said, "Yes." He looked at her in a way no one had looked at her in a long time, not with desire, but with attention, understanding, and a quiet kind of care. And that was the moment she knew the line between them had already shifted. Even if nothing inappropriate had happened, she opened the door, thanking him for the ride, but she moved slowly, as if leaving the van took more effort than it should have. She stepped into the cool night air, and the drizzle touched her skin like a reminder of reality, but her heart remained in the small warm space behind her, beating in a rhythm she didn't recognize. And though she didn't look back yet, she felt it, the pull, the connection, the question hanging in the air between them. A question she wasn't sure she was ready to answer, but she knew it wouldn't disappear, not after everything that happened inside that van, not after the way Daniel had looked at her, not after the way she had felt alive for the first time in years. And as she walked toward her front door, the storm fading behind her, Emily Carter had no idea that this was only the beginning, only the first step into a story she never expected to live, but already couldn't forget. Rain hammered on the van like 1,000 tiny fists, turning the world outside into rolling waves of silver. Emily sat in the passenger seat with her hands tight on her lap, feeling the storm inside her chest grow louder than the storm outside. The windows blurred so quickly that the city around them disappeared, leaving only soft shapes of lights and shadows. It felt like they were driving through a new world, one hidden from everything familiar, one she never expected to step into. Daniel drove with calm focus, but every now and then he glanced at her, checking to make sure she was okay. She nodded each time, though her heart was racing with a mix of nerves and something she wasn't ready to name. The storm had pushed them together, but the feelings rising inside her had nothing to do with the weather. Their conversation came fast and easy, like water finding its path. When Daniel asked about her dreams, she answered before she even realized she was speaking, telling him she once wanted to be a photographer, that she used to collect old cameras, that she dreamed of traveling across the country taking pictures of small towns and faces full of stories. She hadn't spoken those dreams aloud in years, and saying them again felt like opening a window in a room that had been closed for too long. Daniel listened with genuine interest, his eyes bright even in the dim light. He shared his own dreams, talking about starting a small delivery company, one where he could hire local drivers who needed a second chance. He told her he loved the open road, that he liked the freedom of driving for hours with the radio up and the windows down. Emily felt a soft ache in her chest as he spoke, realizing how long it had been since someone looked at her like her inner world mattered. Lightning flashed suddenly, bright enough to light up the entire inside of the van. Emily jumped, her breath catching. Without thinking, Daniel reached across the console, placing his hand gently over hers. The touch was warm, steady, grounding. She didn't pull away, and he didn't rush to move his hand either. They sat like that for several seconds, not speaking, not even breathing deeply, just feeling the weight of the moment between them. She knew the touch was innocent, but the emotion behind it was not. It wasn't attraction alone, it was understanding. It was the comfort of being seen after living behind invisible walls for so long. The rain grew heavier, drumming loudly on the roof. The van wipers struggled to keep up, Swiping across the windshield in frantic arcs, Daniel slowed down, carefully steering through the deep puddles forming on the road. "Storm's getting rough," he murmured, keeping one hand on the wheel. Emily nodded. But she wasn't thinking about the storm anymore. She was thinking about the warmth of his hand, the comforting sound of his voice, and the way her heart had been quietly waking up since the moment she stepped into the van. The smell of rain and damp clothes filled the van, mixing with the scent of Daniel's cologne. She felt strangely safe in the small space, even though she knew she should be thinking about boundaries, responsibility, and the life waiting for her at home. But right now all she could think about was how long it had been since she felt this alive. Daniel asked her about her childhood, about the places she loved to visit when she was younger. Emily told him about summers at her aunt's cabin in Montana, about swimming in cold lakes and collecting pine cones. She told him about how she used to climb the old apple tree in the backyard and pretend she was in a different world, one where anything was possible. He laughed lightly at that, saying he used to do the same with an oak tree near his childhood home in Oregon. For a moment, they were two kids again, sharing the memories of simpler days. As the van rolled through the watery streets, Emily felt warmth spread through her chest, a warmth she didn't want to lose, a warmth she had forgotten she could still feel. Then came another flash of lightning, followed by a sharp blast of thunder. Emily tensed, and without thinking she reached for Daniel's arm this time. His muscles tightened under her touch, but he didn't move. Away, he looked at her with soft concern. "You're okay," he said gently. "I've got you." His words were simple, but they echoed through her, stirring emotions she had tried to bury for years. She felt safe, comforted, and heartbreakingly understood. The storm grew worse, forcing Daniel to take slower streets. At one point they stopped at a red light, the rain striking the roof in powerful bursts. The world outside was washed in blurry reds and yellows, and for a moment it felt like they were the only two people left on the planet. Daniel looked at her again, his eyes steady, searching. "Emily," he whispered, as if afraid to disturb the fragile moment. She swallowed, her throat tight. The sound of her name in his voice sent a shiver through her, not of fear but of recognition. "You seem like you're carrying so much," he continued. "Like you haven't had someone to talk to in a long time." His words struck deep, too deep. She looked away, blinking hard as her emotions threatened to spill over. "It's been a while," she admitted quietly. He nodded, as if he already knew, as if he had sensed it long before she ever said it aloud. But before either of them could say anything more, a loud horn blared behind them, jolting the moment apart. Daniel snapped his attention forward and drove through the green light, the spell breaking but the emotion still simmering in the small space between them. The van filled with soft silence, not an awkward one, but a thoughtful one, the kind that lingers because neither person wants to break the fragile connection forming between them. Emily stared out the window, watching the rain streak down the glass like hundreds of racing tears. She didn't cry, but she felt something inside her loosen, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a very long time. Vulnerability, longing, recognition. She wasn't falling in love, she told herself. It wasn't that, it couldn't be that, but she was waking up to emotions she had once thought were gone forever. Daniel cleared his throat gently, trying to lighten the mood, asking her about her favorite movies, her favorite restaurants in Seattle, and her favorite places to drive when she needed to breathe. The conversation flowed again, faster now, easier, almost like the storm outside couldn't touch the warmth building inside the van. She learned that Daniel volunteered at an animal shelter on weekends, that he visited his mother every Sunday without fail, that he loved hiking and camping and sitting near waterfalls because they made him feel small in a peaceful way. Emily shared things she hadn't said in years, like how she loved quiet mornings, how she missed painting, how she sometimes wished she could pack a small bag, get in her car, and drive until she found a town that felt like a story waiting to be written. The van became a world of its own, separate from her job, her responsibilities, her marriage, separate from everything she had long accepted as unchangeable. For a while she forgot to worry, forgot to overthink, forgot to protect her heart. But when the rain finally began to soften, and the roads became familiar again, the world outside slowly came back into focus. Emily felt the shift immediately, like a door closing in the distance, gently but unmistakably. Daniel noticed it too, but he didn't say anything. Instead he drove quietly, giving her space to breathe, to think, to understand the weight of what she was feeling. When he turned onto her street, the house lights glowed through the thinning rain. The comfortable, predictable world she had known for 10 years stood waiting for her like a reminder. But Emily Carter was not the same woman who had stepped into the van earlier. She knew that now. She felt it in every heartbeat, and though nothing inappropriate had happened, something undeniably powerful had. Something she couldn't pretend away, something she couldn't forget. As Daniel slowed to a stop in front of her home, she knew part 2 of her story was ending, but something deeper, scarier and more beautiful was just beginning. Emily took a slow breath, steadying herself, knowing she would carry this storm with her long after the rain stopped. The rain had slowed to a soft drizzle by the time Daniel pulled up in front of Emily's house, but the storm inside her had not settled at all. The quiet in the van felt heavier than anything she had felt in years, not because it was awkward, but because it carried every unspoken thing that had happened between them. The glow from her porch light reflected off the wet pavement, and the familiar sight of her home felt strangely distant, like it belonged to another version of her. The woman who lived here yesterday was not the same woman sitting in Daniel's van now. She knew that much. She could feel the difference in her heartbeat, in her breath, in the way her hands wouldn't stay still. Daniel turned off the engine, and the faint hum of the van faded, leaving only the sound of soft rain tapping the roof. He didn't speak right away, giving her time to gather herself, but the longer the silence stretched, the more she felt the weight of everything she didn't know how to say. Finally he looked at her, his voice low and gentle. "You okay?" The same question he had asked before, but this time it felt different, deeper, like he wasn't just asking about the storm or the drive or the fear of thunder. He was asking about her life, her heart, her pain. She nodded, though the truth was complicated. "I'm fine," she whispered, even though fine was the last thing she felt. Daniel studied her face, his eyes filled with a kind of patient concern that made her chest tighten. He was younger than her, but the steadiness in his expression made him feel older, wiser, like someone who had learned to see beneath the surface of things. "You seem like you're holding your breath," he said softly. "Like you've been doing that for a long time." Emily blinked, and the words cut through her like a quiet truth she had been avoiding for years. She didn't answer, because she didn't trust herself to speak without revealing too much. Instead, she reached for the door handle, partly to escape the intensity of the moment, partly because she was scared of what might happen if she stayed even a second longer. But Daniel reached out gently, not touching her, just stopping her with words, "Emily, wait." She froze, her hand on the door, her heart thudding in her chest. "I'm not trying to complicate your life," he continued, his voice careful. "I just want you to know that you deserve to feel alive." The words hit harder than any confession could have. They were simple, honest, and unexpectedly tender. Emily felt her throat tighten, and for a moment she could only stare at him, seeing the sincerity written across his face. She opened the door slowly, stepping into the cool air, the smell of wet earth rising from the ground. Her shoes splashed softly on the pavement as she stepped out, but she didn't move toward the porch right away. She stood still, feeling the drizzle land on her skin like tiny questions she couldn't answer. She wasn't sure what she expected. Maybe that Daniel would drive away quickly. Maybe that he would call out her name again. Maybe that she would turn around and everything would suddenly make sense. But none of that happened. Instead, he simply sat there waiting, watching her with a quiet patience that made her insides twist. Emily took a few steps toward her porch, each one heavy, slow, thoughtful, but before she reached the steps, she paused, her heart pulling her in 2 directions at once. She turned back toward the van, the rain catching the light as it fell around her. Daniel's eyes lifted to meet hers, and in that moment the world felt painfully still. "This isn't the end of the story, is it?" she asked, her voice soft, unsure, trembling with emotion she tried to hide. Daniel didn't answer immediately, and her breath caught as she waited. The rain tapped gently on the hood of the van, the porch light flickered faintly, and the entire world seemed to lean in for his response. Then he smiled. Not a bold smile, not a smile full of promises, but a gentle, hopeful smile that said he felt the same unspoken pull she did. "It doesn't have to be," he replied quietly. The words lingered in the air between them, warm and dangerous, comforting and terrifying all at once. Emily turned slowly and walked toward her door, every step echoing with the strange new awareness that her life was changing, not in a wild or reckless way, but in a deep emotional shift she couldn't ignore. When she stepped inside, the familiar smell of the house surrounded her. Laundry detergent, old wood, the faint scent of Mark's cologne. But instead of grounding her, it felt like a reminder of everything she had been pushing aside for years. The living room was dim, lit only by a small lamp. The quiet was thick, heavy, different from the quiet in the van. This quiet felt lonely, like an empty room in her heart she had learned to tiptoe around. She hung her coat on the hook, her hands trembling slightly, She could hear the faint sound of the television from the bedroom down the hall, where Mark was likely waiting, not worried, not wondering where she had been, simply assuming she was running late. She stood in the hallway for a long moment, trying to calm her breathing, trying to make sense of all the swirling emotions inside her, but nothing settled, nothing made sense, nothing felt simple anymore. She knew she loved Mark in a steady, history-filled way, but she also knew that their marriage had fallen into a quiet place where neither of them had reached for each other in far too long. The thought hurt, not because of blame, but because of the truth she had been too afraid to face. Something inside her had been sleeping, and in that van with Daniel it had opened its eyes, not because Daniel was some escape or fantasy or easy distraction, but because he had given her something she hadn't felt in years, the feeling of being seen, understood, valued. She walked into the kitchen, hearing the faint echo of rain outside the windows. She leaned on the counter, closing her eyes, letting the feelings rush through her. She thought about Daniel's smile, the warmth of his voice, the gentle way he said her name. She thought about the lightning, the touch of his hand, the way he listened to her dreams like they mattered. Her heart ached with confusion, longing, fear, hope, everything tangled together into one painful, beautiful mess. She knew she couldn't pretend this didn't happen. She knew she couldn't go back to the version of herself who moved through life half asleep, but she also knew she couldn't run into something new without understanding what she truly wanted, what she truly needed. Later, when she went to bed beside Mark, she lay awake long after he fell asleep, staring at the ceiling, listening to the last drops of rain slide down the window. She didn't think of betrayal, and she didn't think of making any reckless choices. She thought only of the truth rising inside her. Quiet, strong, impossible to ignore. Something in her life needed to change. Something in her heart had already changed. She wasn't sure what the next chapter would look like. She wasn't sure what choices she would make. She wasn't sure where her path would lead. But she knew one thing with absolute clarity. The story that started in that delivery van was not over. It was only beginning, and whether it led to hard conversations, new honesty in her marriage, or a future she hadn't dared imagine, Emily Carter knew her heart would never again settle for fading quietly into the background of her own life. Not after Daniel, not after the storm, not after feeling alive again.